You may want to know how effective was cavalry when charging infantry. This is an interesting subject because I think that Hollywood movies are using a model which is not particularly realistic. In films, you often see the cavalry doing two things. One, charging the infantry, then stopping in the middle of the infantry and fighting with the infantry on horseback. This hardly happened because in this way, cavalry was wasting the advantage that they had on infantry, that is mobility. And being in the middle of infantry fighting on horseback is not particularly practical for the knight, and the horse is a big and difficult to protect target. The other thing that you see in films is the cavalry smashing against infantry and breaking it into pieces. Again, that's hardly realistic, that's a bit more likely to happen, but an infantry unit which is well formed, that is, all the soldiers are tied together, they are not panicking, can often withstand a charge. However, there is a relatively easy way to stop the cavalry for infantry, which is basically having a long weapon. If you try to charge a forest of spears or pikes, well, the horses won't do that. Simply the horses will die, obviously, if they smash against the compact unit with pikes, for example, and so they won't do that. They will simply refuse. They will stop, or they veer off, or they bolt. Or when the Swiss, the 14th century, started rediscovering the effectiveness of the pike against cavalry, progressively cavalry lost its effectiveness. In the 17th century, charges against formed units were pretty much impossible. In fact, cavalry adopted that strange practice that was the caracole, which I believe we will cover separately in a different video. It was basically a way of using pistols and short carbines against the infantry units rather than charging them. However, cavalry remained very effective if they could charge the sides or the rear of the units, that is, the unprotected sides of the unit, or they could charge units that were not formed for battle. They could surprise units in march, or they could charge units that were already routing, that were already retreating, not in good order. Most often the bulk of the losses in a battle in the 14th, 15th, 16th century, even in the 17th century, happened when, at the end of the battle, when the units were retreating and the winner were pursuing the loser with its cavalry. And this will become an art during the Napoleonic Wars and becoming a basic tactical assumption, a basic tactical practice. The pike became obsolete when the bayonet was invented, which was pretty much having the same effect. It was hardly used by infantry to fight other infantry. It was very rare that infantry ended up in a melee using the bayonets. The bayonets was a psychological weapon, but it was also necessary to defend against cavalry because it created the same effect as the pikes. So the musket plus the bayonet was shorter than the pike, definitely, but this fact was compensated by the highest rate of fire, increased effectiveness of the musket. Infantry charged by cavalry usually try to form a square. In this way the unit had no flanks that could be attacked, and what happened is that the cavalry normally veered off on the sides of the square and tried to go round and round and come back and used to try to fire pistols, for example, or the short carbines that many cavalry units had, toward the units, trying to sort of open a gap into the square and to create the opportunity to actually enter inside the square and attack the infantry from their rear, which was in this case the inside of the square. There have been quite a lot of cases in which the squares have been broken by the cavalry, but we can say that a well executed square, a square not executed in a hurry, or a square by a unit that was actually able to fire from the square, not only to use the bayonets, was hardly beaten. It was almost always external situations that actually caused the square to collapse. During the Napoleonic period, a viable tactical option would have been actually to have a to have the cavalry charge the enemy infantry, force them to have a square, then bring forward some artillery to fire at the squares, because the squares could actually move, but they were very slow, and use the artillery shooting with canisters to create a gap into the squares, and then having the cavalry charge into the squares. As the firepower of infantry increased with new rifles, new weapons, machine guns and so on, then pretty much the charge became unpractical. One of the latest charges that ever happened in the Second World War, but they were isolated episodes and with limited effect or no effect, and often brought to the extermination of the attacking cavalry unit. So firepower actually destroyed the shock effect of cavalry. There we go.